On this episode, we give a market and crop update, talk about applications and cutoff times for herbicides, and discuss some key information we learned from Dr. Undersander from the University of Wisconsin at a recent alfalfa training put on by America's Alfalfa.
Hi, this is Joe Merschman. Welcome to Cup of Joe, episode number 33. Today we have Tommy Johns, Turk Regulator, and Ben Pieper, and let's talk about some of the things that are happening right now that farmers need to be watching. Turk, what do you have?
Obviously, one of the big news items this week was the USDA reports come out. 10 million or 3 million acres lower corn planted for forecast for this next year. Probably will be adjusted lower. Most reports end up going lower when they start a trend. 10 bushels less crop yield taken off in one report from the last, and so that's a big change, and so that's big numbers, and of course that's moving the corn market up as well. Soybeans, they left unchanged, both acres and yield. We all know that soybean yields have been cut for sure, and so look for that to be an update coming forward. You know, the next big report's going to be June 28th. That'll be the acreage and planted acres and grain stocks report coming out on the 28th. So that'll be probably be the next big fireworks for the marketplace. But crop progress report come out this week talking about 15 points average lower over the 5-year average on corn. But the I states were down 21 points over the 5-year average. So that crop progress report, when you look at the national average, is not a weighted average. It's the average of all those states. Good corn's down in Kentucky and Tennessee, and there's not a lot of corn planted down there when you look at the states. So the I states are way behind, and then same way on soybeans. You know, the crop progress report on soybeans. A lot of these soybeans got planted. A big chunk got planted this last week, but they're not out of the ground yet. So look for those numbers to again continue to be way behind 5-year averages all year long, and we just need to be mindful of these numbers are going to continue to haunt us. Ben, you've been out looking at crops. What do they look like?
Yeah, we've been up to Ames, so central Iowa. I've been over to south central Iowa and even into north central Missouri, and it's all over the board. We can see crops that are slightly yellowed, but have reached V5, V6, V7, and in the best conditions, they're slightly yellowed and stunted out just a little bit, but the fields are even. They look like they got put in the ground without too much compaction, and I would say that that's probably 10% of the crop that you look at. The good majority of the crop, you can see where the tractor's driven through. You can see where we're missing nitrogen off of 60 mile an hour driving down the road looking at the crops. You can see where the compaction's at. You can see where we've lost nitrogen. You can see where that corn crop is going to need help. You can see weeds that are out in the field. I mean, some of these fields haven't even been touched with herbicide because you can't get out across them because of the continuous rains. So, I mean, you drove down south. What did you see when you were heading that way?
Well, again, Missouri has the worst crop ratings. When it comes to corn, they were only 20% good to excellent, which is usually this time of year Missouri has the best looking corn because they get planted earlier. This year they are the worst. So again, it's bad down there. I mean, everything needs help. Let's put it like that.
Right. So from a herbicide standpoint, I'm kind of concerned with where we're at on corn and soybeans both, because I think this is probably the weediest I've seen some of our bean fields get put in because the guys aren't doing their normal tillage programs. They're stabbing stuff into no-till, and they didn't get their pre's put on in timely functions. So what do we need to think about? What do farmers need to think about when they are moving forward, now that the crop potentially is in the ground or it's going to go in the ground? We need to be using powerful first rates or our first post application. So stick with your main plan on your post application and maybe switch up what residual you would have had, because you can't spray your PPOs and your certain pre-emergence herbicides. You can't spray on top of the beans because it'll ding them. But make sure that you do have like a Group 15 style of herbicide mixed in with your post, and make sure that you're at high, robust rates to make sure that you have with it being as late as it is in the season, you might get by with a one-pass program, is what I'm getting at. Because if you use high rates of residuals, you get a good burn down, and hopefully you kill all the weeds now that your beans are poking through the ground. Hopefully with the amount of heat and sunshine that you get, we'll reach canopy. Hopefully you planted your beans a little bit thicker so that canopy is reached quicker, because one of the things that Joe has taught me is you want canopy to happen by June 21st, June 20th. So
yeah, the rule of thumb is if you can have canopy by the longest day of the year, then you're maximizing your sunlight interception for maximum yield. And Ben, that brings me to a couple points, and you can chime in here, but the different technologies have different cutoff dates for spraying those posts. For example, the Extend system, the cutoff date is first bloom, which is R1, and that's going to be here fairly quick for those soybeans that are been planted. And the Liberty Link system is up to R1, can be applied to R1 growth stage. Don't apply soybeans that are R2. R2 is full bloom. R1 is the beginning of bloom. And the Enlist system, which gives you the longest window, can be applied all the way, no later than the end of R2 or full bloom stage. So when you go into R3, then you have to stop applying the Enlist herbicides. But the bottom line is 4 days to go from R1 to R2, and then from R2 to R3 is about 10 days. So this is going to put some more pressure on applicators and farmers to try to get these post applications on. So and then there's a 45-day cutoff on Extend from the time you plant it. You must have the herbicide applied, the dicamba.
In my opinion, around here, in a great portion of our selling area, the 45 days is null and void if you got your beans in the ground last week or this week. So, the beans are going to come in the ground. It's going to take 5 days for the beans to pop out of the ground, and then probably another 10, 12, 14 days by the time you get from your first set of true leaves, then your first 3 trifoliates, like what we talked about last week. Once a bean plant has 3 trifoliates, it starts setting blooms.
So what you're saying is they don't have 45 days.
Correct.
Way less than that, because it's going to start flowering in less than 45 days. So
correct.
You've got to be very aggressive to be on label to apply your herbicides early. And rightfully so, because all the labels indicate 2 to 4 inch tall weeds anyhow.
Right.
It's the right time to kill. And I always tell a farmer, I said, once you see that weed poke its head out of the ground, by the time you get the sprayer filled up and put the chemical in and get out to the field, you've got 4 inch tall weeds. Right. But if you do it when you see the 4 inch tall weeds, you've usually got 8 inch tall weeds when you get out there. So you got to be early and aggressive, and that's the best way to manage weeds, is to be aggressive, because once you get behind, you can't catch up.
I've been in a lot of fields, and I've been seeing a lot of compaction. I mean, just really tight packed fields. And what are you kind of seeing, and what are you recommending for some of these guys that, I was in a replant situation, and I told the farmer that this field needed to be almost into alfalfa because it was so packed in there. What are you seeing, and what are you recommending, and what do you think something we could do for farming practice to kind of break that down?
Find your areas of compaction, mark them out with either notes or spatial identity on, there's lots of different platforms that you can get aerial imagery.
Sure.
But figure out where those areas of compaction are at, and then do not forget about them in the fall, because as soon as the corn goes brown, you can't see your stressed areas near as easy, especially after the combine runs through.
Yeah.
You don't want to forget about those areas. Those areas they need to be the first areas that you look at when you run your inline ripper through.
That part
inline
is
rippers,
almost all whole fields.
well, and then that's how you want to deal with most guys want to deal with a limited amount of residue being taken off, so that's where your inline ripper comes in, or your subsoiler, and don't forget about where those areas are at.
Good advice.
Good old tile probe or a penetrometer will help you find those areas. If you just go out there and look around, you'll find them.
Yep.
Tommy, bring us up to date on alfalfa.
Well, we Ben and I got to go to a meeting here on Wednesday to meet Dr. Dan Undersander and the FGI genetic team, and a lot of interesting things. We got to spend one-on-one with pretty much Dr. Dan Undersander. Wrote the book on alfalfa, Joe, so we learned a lot. We talked a lot about winter kill, and we learned that alfalfa is winter killed when the soil temp is at 13 degrees or lower, which is kind of rare in a lot of instances because usually you get that snow cover, and usually the ground temp, even in the coldest part of our in some of our territories, only gets to about 25, 26, sometimes not even below freezing. That's why when we saw a lot of fields where once the snow came off and the alfalfa was out there, where you saw a good alfalfa stand and then you saw bare spots. The good alfalfa stand had snow cover, it was drifted over. The bare spots had obviously nothing on top of it, and that's where it got colder soil temps and died off. A lot of the winter kill that we learned was a lot from the moisture, extra moisture that was in the fields, a lot of heaving that took place, and Dan Undersander was really surprised that even down in southeast Iowa here, as far south as we are, that we had as much heaving. And again, we've had a winter for a winter and a spring for the ages for sure. And we talked a little bit about the 3 keys of why your alfalfa stand isn't getting established, and he pointed out was low soil pH. You're planting too deep or too shallow, and you're not getting firm enough. When we talked about compaction out in some of these cornfields, basically you want to be able to bounce a basketball across that field for the firmness. You should be able to bounce it up and down, or it's just not packed in enough around the soil. We get soil particles, and you have air around that seed, and it's not getting soil to seed or seed to soil contact. Mm-hmm. So, and we learned a lot. Ben, you might touch on this a little bit. We learned a lot about how these guys are planting some of these Harv Extra varieties, and they're actually getting more value over that than they would silage.
Right. So he mentioned Dr. Understander. This is his quote, and not mine. And I think it's just an amazing statistic that with a 3-cut system or even a delayed system like what we're looking at right now, you can get so many more ton per acre with higher protein values with alfalfa than you can with silage hay, because with that Harv Extra trait that we're looking at,
You're talking corn silage, right?
corn silage, correct. With that Harv Extra trait that we're looking at, they're looking as high. They use conservative numbers when they talk about this. So 15% is on all the stuff, on all their handouts that we look at, but they're seeing as high, and this is Understander studies and America's Alfalfa, or FGIs, they're seeing as high as 25% increase in yield when you go from a 3-cutting or a 4-cutting to a 3-cutting system. And that's where they're talking. Now you have a high tonnage system that has a higher protein content than a corn silage system. So it's just very interesting. So
you're saying that 3 cuts of alfalfa will produce more tonnage than 1 cut of corn silage plus higher quality?
Yes, and with it being Harv Extra, with it being the 3-cut system, it's going to have the same relative feed quality as a non. It's going to have the regular feed quality of a 4-cut system because it has reduced lignin genetic insertion capability. So it's just really, really interesting trait, and they're finding that with the low hay supply that we have now, alfalfa is probably a better moneymaker than corn or soybeans at this point in time, and they're finding that more and more guys, even beef cattle producers, are switched over to this trait. So
the Harv Extra trait, which is basically has Roundup in it for establishment, plus it has the low lignin, which is
reduced lignin,
which basically makes the alfalfa more digestible.
Correct.
The stems and everything are just, I don't know what you want to call it, but like easier for the animal to digest, and because of that, you got a longer window for harvest. In fact, you were making a comment before we start recording that even with the delayed, farmers just raining, they couldn't harvest their alfalfa. the Harv Extra alfalfa, even though it's very rank, is still extremely high quality. Is that correct?
Yep, it's average. It's average quality, and it just surprises the farmers.
When you have that late delay.
Right.
40, I mean, they're talking 40 days
Yeah.
late first cutting in some cases.
And that's mind blowing for the alfalfa world, if you think.
So
about it.
even though, most farmers are saying their hay is junk, with Harv Extra farmers are still harvesting quality, decent quality hay.
Yep.
Well, what gets me is, you on the Harv Extra, you get a little bit of a sticker shock because the price is a little more than some of your conventional alfalfa hybrids, but it's almost 2-to-1, Joe, with some of these other hybrids out there, and we saw side-by-side differences with the quality, like Ben was talking about, the RFQ. And what's really interesting, Dr. Dan Undersander said, with Harv Extra, your first cutting, you do it on time. He says the next 2, 3, or 4 cuttings, if you get that in that year, you delay those and you'll get even more yield. You just you train your crop and you train your idea. And like Ben said, that deal where the guy couldn't get in 40 days, that farmer was floored. And that was actually a trial run. The guy was kind of, someone from FGI was trying to get that farmer to understand how Harv Extra works. He let him try some. He had a 40-day delay and he still had as good a quality as ever would have with some of his other conventional hybrids.
It's good, good information.
Very good information. And then I wanted to say, Joe, thoughts and prayers to everybody that's affected down south with all this flooding. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
I know
sad.
our rivers are going down, but they're still pretty high down in southern Illinois and the Boot Hill, Missouri, and those folks down there are really suffering. And the levees, I think they've been being taxed, so there are still a lot of concerns, even though the waters have crested there. But there's a lot of good farm ground that may or may not get planted this year, and that's going to play into those numbers like Turk was talking about. So I think every farmer, and anytime there's anything really bad like we have this year, there's always an opportunity. And so now the key thing is to look for the opportunity, how to rebound from this, because this is definitely going to affect the supply this year, and that's going to create opportunities for those that got old crop yet, and potentially to sell forward on some new crops. So,
Yeah.
well, that concludes our episode today, and as always, thank you for planting Mershman seeds, and thank you for your support, and we'll see you next week.